Welcome to today's webinar, and the topic is the Manager's Guide to Securing the Oracle E-Business Suite. So most of Integrigy's webinars are fairly technical in nature, and we go into great technical detail talking about individual settings and things like that. So what we've done for this webinar is actually take it up a notch and trying to talk to the Oracle technical managers, Oracle project managers, CIO, security officers, and those sort of people who may not know the internals of the Oracle E-Business Suite, but have some sort of responsibility for making sure that environment is secure. So we'll go through a number of topics here related to how to secure the Oracle E-Business Suite and try to really focus in on what you need to know. What should you be pointing at your DBAs and saying, have you done this? Is this important? Are we up to date on security patches and those type of things? So we'll start off and talk about some of the security challenges with the Oracle E-Business Suite, and then talk about the configuration, protecting sensitive data, and then a special topic, external access, where you're opening up your Oracle E-Business Suite environment to the internet. And then we'll leave a little bit of time left at the end of the presentation for questions and answers. So for those of you not familiar with Integrigy, we're basically specialists in the Oracle E-Business Suite security. So we were founded in 2001. And our main focus is still the Oracle E-Business Suite, but we also do a lot of work with Oracle databases, SQL Server databases, and other databases and organizations. And we have two divisions within Integrigy. So we do a product side where we have AppSentry. And AppSentry helps automate and validate the security of your E-Business Suite environment. And then we also have a product called AppDefend, which also protects your external E-Business Suite environment. On the service side, we do a lot of on-site work at clients. So we do security assessments, compliance assistance. We do a lot of security design services around implementing, auditing, encryption, things like that. So we're very familiar with the Oracle E-Business Suite. We spend a lot of time researching and developing our knowledge base. And that's where this presentation kind of comes from. So let's start off and talk about security challenges with the Oracle E-Business Suite. What do you need to know? Why is security such a challenge with the E-Business Suite? So let's first talk about the concept of security decay. So you've got your shiny, brand new Oracle E-Business Suite environment. You've hopefully implemented it correctly and at least done some work on hardening. The problem with a large, complex application like the Oracle E-Business Suite is a lot of things are going on. You have to apply security patches. There's vulnerabilities being found and patched by Oracle. You're doing application upgrades. You're letting users into the database level. So over time, even though you may have done the correct thing the first time or you may not have done it, your security is just decaying over time. As you're using the application, as it's changing, as there's external things going on like security, vulnerabilities being fixed by Oracle, people publishing information on how to hack the Oracle E-Business Suite on the internet, you have to be aware of all this that's going on around you, even though you may not be doing anything with the security. Once you've installed the application, that was probably the most secure it's ever been. Over time, it's decaying. So when we talk about security, a lot of what we're looking at is not a one-time event. It's ongoing. You always have to be diligent about security because it's decaying over time pretty rapidly. Another area that really impacts the Oracle E-Business Suite is complexity. Complexity and security are basically opposed because if you look at the Oracle E-Business Suite, this is one of the world's largest applications. If you kind of group it into some applications like SAP, Oracle E-Business Suite, PeopleSoft, these are some of the most complex applications ever written. There's millions of lines of code. There are hundreds of modules. So with the Oracle E-Business Suite alone, there's 250 modules. Then you've got the database, the application server, reporting, business intelligence, concurrent manager. All these things are working together and are a very complex system. And when you're starting to talk about that in terms of security risk, well, it becomes very complex and there's a lot of security risk in the application. Not one single person can really get their hands around the entire thing. You may be delegating a lot of these tasks and responsibilities to the DBAs, but are they Oracle Application Server, Apache experts, web application security experts? No, they're DBAs. And what you're a lot of times is expecting the DBAs to be responsible for security of the entire environment. So this is where the complexity and the Oracle E-Business Suite really come into play. And you have to really understand that. A lot of things that we find during our on-site security assessments are not related to the DBAs not doing their jobs or they purposely missed something. Well, it's just a complex application. They just didn't understand. They didn't know. They applied a patch and it changed something that was either not in the documentation or was just a footnote somewhere. They may have installed some new database accounts and their new default passwords. So there's a lot of things going on within the application, and it's very hard to keep on top of it. So unless you're really diligent and spending time and doing periodic assessments or reviewing what's been done from a security perspective, you most likely have some security holes and issues in your environment. And finally, the final challenge is an organizational misalignment. The problem with Oracle E-Business Suite Security is because it's such a complex application, a lot of things can fall between the cracks. You've got a number of different teams within your organization that have some focus on security. Hopefully the DBAs are spending a lot of their time thinking about security, applying security patches, trying to protect the application. But unfortunately, that's not their priority. They're not being judged on security. They're being judged on performance and uptime. If your e-business suite environment's not up 99.9% of the time or more, you're really going to be pointing your fingers at the DBA. Unfortunately, uptime and security are also opposed. As you're trying to secure the application, it's harder to maintain, it's harder to keep up. And that's why the DBAs are sometimes resistant to me making basic changes. Things like auditing, they're concerned about performance. They don't want to impact the performance of the application in the sake of security. You may have an dedicated IT security team. Unfortunately, they're focused in on networks and operating systems and external vulnerabilities and maybe web applications. Most often they have zero understanding of databases, and hardly ever would an IT security person really understand Oracle Business Suite Security. So a lot of times we see in most organizations, IT security just ignores the application. They have so many things on their plate, just trying to keep the firewalls up and running, things like that. Oracle Business Suite Security is just not a focus. So even though you think you might be secure, no one's from IT security has ever looked at it. Internal audit often does a lot of application assessments, but usually they're focused in on the application level. They're looking at the application internal controls, the segregation of duties. They're not going in and checking if the app's password is set to apps, which then can circumvent all those application controls. So a lot of times security is kind of falling between the cracks. No one's spending time looking at the technical security. And when I'm talking about security throughout this presentation, we're really focused in on the technical aspect. Think of it as once you log into the application and pick a responsibility, kind of our responsibility is done at that point. We're assuming the application security controls are in place. What we're trying to do here is make sure that no one can get in the back end, hack in, circumvent those application controls. That when people are doing a transaction, it's that person is authenticated and is properly using the application. We're not going to be looking at if that person actually has the authorizations to do that transaction. We're making sure that they haven't circumvented the controls to get to that point. So that's looking at some of the security challenges at a high level. So now let's kind of focus in on some e-business suite security risks specifically. So we've done a couple presentations for internal auditors and external auditors talking about the top 10 Oracle e-business suite security risks. And so this is kind of our basic list that we go through a lot of times, and we try to get our clients to focus in on it. Say, okay, here's some major areas where you can lose data. You can have a major security event within your organization. And some of them are simple, like such as default passwords. So when we talk about a default password, the Oracle Business Suite is delivered with 250 database accounts. All those have default passwords. And by the way, any one of those database accounts, I can actually hack the application by just connecting to it using an account like GL, which is for the general ledger. Oh, by the way, its password out of the box is GL. So all I have to do is, if it's not changed correctly, connect to the databases GL, and I can actually read all the data within the application. External application access is another area. When you're opening up your application to the internet, you're not opening up just maybe iSupplier. If you're running HR, you're also opening up your HR system to the internet if you're not doing it correctly. Direct database access, number 4, is also a major issue, because if you've got a lot of people within your organization connecting and accessing the database directly, they can easily circumvent the application controls and potentially insert transactions directly, access data they're not supposed to. So these are some of the issues that we're going to kind of address in this presentation, kind of going through. I won't go through each one in detail. We've got other presentations for that. If you go to our YouTube website, youtube.com/Integrigy, you'll actually see some of the presentations that kind of delve into some of more of these topics in greater detail. So one of the areas we also really focus in on is what are the threats and risks. We can talk about you have to fix this, you have to fix that, but if you don't put it into a context of what somebody can do, it's not as meaningful. So here, this chart we go through quite often and talk about, okay, here's the risks for an Oracle Business Suite environment. And then what we've done is taken those top 10 security issues within the application and mapped them out. So number one is sensitive data loss. So depending on what you're running in your Oracle Business Suite, if you're running an HR system, we were just working with one client, they've got 250,000 HR records. So that includes full name, address, date of birth, and social security number. On the black market, those are worth about $50 each. So if you kind of quickly start doing some math, you've got some potentially valuable data, especially if you're running an HR system. If you're not running HR, you may have credit card numbers, you might have people's bank account numbers. We can also talk to a lot of people and say, oh, no way, we don't have any social security numbers. Anybody running AP probably does have social security numbers. So if you have any independent contractors who are 1099, they typically use their social security number as their tax identifier. So even if you're running accounts payable, you probably have some social security numbers within your system. So the threat of data loss is someone can connect either at the database level or potentially through the application, do something called SQL injection and steal data. You can do that externally. And basically, you can go through and steal a large bulk amount of data and then sell that data or use it against you. If I can download your price list, would that be meaningful if your number one competitor had your entire price list and also the prices that you charged every single customer you've ever had? Is that meaningful data? Could you lose a lot of sales and transactions because of that? The second one is the classic fraud, so direct entering of transactions. So now we're talking about basic fraud. And so there's a lot of different ways, and we actually see some issues in this area that we actually are called into some customers and talk about, hey, we lost some data, we lost some money because someone did something. One prime example is, well, if I could go in and take a key account and change the bank account number by a direct database update, well, when you do an EFT payment to that large client or customer or vendor, all of a sudden the money is flowing basically not to them, to my bank account, which could be in another country, and basically very hard to retrieve that. Or I could be maybe changing the application password for the AP manager. So if I'm an AP clerk, now we can actually go through and start entering transactions, creating vendors, and actually doing the classic payment fraud. Third is misuse of application privileges. We see a lot of cases where someone actually can get into someone else's account. One prime example where we actually have seen this before is a lot of people, when they actually create a new eBusiness Suite user account, they create the password for every user as welcome1 or something like that. But they use the same password over and over, and it's something typically silly like welcome1 and welcome123. Well, we saw one case where there was an AP clerk. They knew the new password was welcome123. The new AP manager started, and that person, of course, went to 3 days of training. So what they did as soon as that person started is they started going into their Oracle Business Suite account. The application had completely perfect application controls, so there was segregation of duties in AP, but since that person was able to access the other person's account, in this case the AP managers, they were able to create vendors and then with their own privileges actually go in and create purchase orders and invoices and actually steal about $30,000. These things happen in real life, and it's not very, never makes the front page of the paper, but this is the classic fraud scenarios. The final one is impact on availability of the application. What would happen if someone came in and wiped out your Oracle Business Suite environment? This happens. We don't know actually of a case of Oracle Business Suite environment, but there's actually a number every single year of documented cases where someone plants a Trojan or does something to an application or a large database that wipes out the database and impacts the organization for a number of hours. And if you kind of look through the news stories, you'll actually see these news stories occasionally, and it's not that uncommon. So if someone wiped out your Oracle Business Suite environment and says, well, we can just restore it and bring it from backup. Well, how many hours does that take? How long is your business offline? So if they knew to do it at a very certain time, and you can basically plant these things and leave it running for a while. So if you fire someone, give them a few days, still access to the system, and then all of a sudden they're going through and implementing this and leaving a Trojan in your environment and then wiping out your database on your busiest day of the year, would that be a major impact and financial loss to your organization? These things happen. It's not uncommon. So those are some of the major security risks and threats, and so we'll kind of talk about that. So now that we've talked about some of the challenges and some of the risks and threats, what should you do? Well, the first thing you have to make sure is the application is securely configured. So you really have to be working with your DBAs, the application administrators, and say, okay, what has to be done and what's not being done? Are they going through the security best practices and things like that? The second is, how is data being accessed? One of the key things that you have to do is protect the sensitive data in the environment. So the only way you can do that is, over time, understand exactly who's accessing data, what data is being accessed, and how, and what's being done to protect that access. And finally, if I was running an Oracle Business Suite environment, what I would be obsessing every single night over would be the external configuration. It should be keeping you up at night. As soon as you open up to the internet, all bars are off. Basically, people can access the application, and you should be being attacked every single day. If you don't realize you're being attacked every single day, you're kind of being naive. You can easily go in and go to Google and actually find many, many Oracle Business Suite environments on the internet. And if I can find a flaw or vulnerability, I can actually take over the entire application, even though you may be running iSupply or one simple module on the internet. So now let's talk about some of the things that you need to do to protect the Oracle Business Suite environment. And we'll kind of do this at a very high level at a managerial, but I'll try to explain as many of the details as possible and kind of explain why it's an issue versus just saying check this, check this. We'll walk through and talk about some of the issues in detail and explain to you what the issue is and why it's an issue. So the first starting point is there's actually two very good guides from Oracle, and they're called the Secure Configuration Guides. There's one for 11i and there are 12. One of the reasons I like these is because Integrigy originally wrote them for Oracle. We wrote these back for Oracle in the 2004 timeframe. Helped provide a little bit of the updates until 2007. There hasn't been significant updates since 2007. There was an update recently in 2011. But these haven't changed much, so there's a lot more things you can do. But as a starting point, the DBA should have gone through the secure configuration guides very closely, point by point, and done everything in. This is kind of a great starting point to go from. So if they haven't done this, this should be considered the base. And we'll talk about some of the key settings as that are in the secure configuration guide here. So what are some of the things this secure configuration guide will tell you? One is default passwords. So there's default passwords both at the database level and the application. So the Oracle Business Suite is delivered with a bunch of database accounts. And the way the architecture works behind the scenes is for each module, like General Ledger, there's a database account. And then there's one database account called apps, which has access to all the data. Unfortunately, any of the individual accounts can actually access all the data also. So if you don't change 250 plus database account passwords, people can actually connect to the database and access data that they shouldn't be allowed to, enter transactions, or do whatever. So this is a very simple way in. One of the first things that we do when we do our security assessments, we check all the default passwords, make sure that all of them have been changed. And there's actually a few easy ways to change these, and that's documented in the secure configuration standard. But they all have significant privileges. Over time, whenever you do an upgrade, you apply major patches that apply new modules. Oh, by the way, you get more database accounts. So unless you're actively checking for default database passwords on a routine basis, you basically probably have some in your environment. Another key aspect of the database passwords is when you're doing cloning. What you're doing is basically taking your production database and copying it down to test and development. What we see a lot of times is the DBAs don't change every single database password. What they do is maybe just change the app's password. It is possible for a developer, maybe somebody in India, you may have outsourced some of your development to India or some other third world country. And what they can actually do is take your development environment, grab the database account passwords, and actually break them offline. And they might be able to spend a day or two actually going after one password, but that's possible. So there's other things they have to be thinking about these default passwords is they have to be changed in production, but also when you clone from production to development, you should probably be changing them also. So why are the default passwords a problem? Well, you have to stay on it. We always, and almost every single time we assess an Oracle Business Suite environment, we find a default password. One of the things that we do at Integrigy is we try to understand the root cause analysis when we do our security assessments. And whenever we do an assessment, we always take the findings and anonymize the results and actually add it to a database and say, okay, what did we find in this assessment? and why is it a problem? And then we can kind of bring up statistics and say, well, what do we need to focus in on? Where are the problems? So these are some of the statistics that we found. And so this sampling here is 120 production databases Integrigy has actually done security assessments on in the last couple of years. This is just for some of the standard Oracle database passwords. But as you see, the first two are system. The DBAs are really good at changing those passwords, and they change them quite often, and they do a very good job of protecting them. But then what happens is there's other database accounts, and what we're finding here is like the DBMS and MP account, and that's used for database management. By the way, it had a default password 52% of the time. So out of those 120 databases, a little over 60 had a default password. So that means I can connect to that database and actually start doing things. That account has somewhat limited privileges, but unfortunately it has enough privileges to allow me to take over the entire database and read all your data. So 50% of the time, just one account that we'd go after right away, we were in seconds, and we could take over the database, compromise the entire Oracle Business Suite environment. That's how easy it is. So unless people are very diligent about checking these passwords, they're in a lot of different environments. So that was the database accounts, and now there's actually another set of default passwords within Oracle Business Suite environment, and these are actually application accounts. So the Oracle Business Suite environment is actually seeded with a number of standard application accounts. So these are what you would sign in when you go into the Oracle Business Suite login page. Like you use sysadmin, and the password, it comes with a sysadmin. Well, there's 20 other accounts, and so these are some of the key ones that have significant privileges. So unless your DBA is going in and changing these application passwords from the default, they're available. So ASG ADM, passwords welcome. Oh, by the way, it has system administrator responsibility. So even though the DBA say, oh yeah, no one can access sysadmin, we changed the password, it's protected. Oh, by the way, did you change the other 23 passwords? And these are well documented in the Secure Configuration Guide. So if you've been through that and all those accounts have changed, then hopefully these accounts are all secured. As you can see, a number of these accounts have pretty significant privileges. So a lot of system administrators, admin type accounts are on here. And again, this is a devil in the details. So unless you go through each of these and make sure they're all changed, it's kind of hard to do. For Integrigy, we actually wrote our own product, and now we sell it at AppCentry because we had so many. It took us so long during our security assessments to actually figure out what all these passwords were, that they were all changed. We actually had to write a product internally, which we started selling about 5 years ago as our AppCentry product. So again, the devil in the details. You just have to make sure, here, 23 accounts, each one is changed. So that's kind of the application accounts, the database accounts. So now let's talk a little bit about password controls. So within the Oracle Business Suite, you have application accounts, and there's a number of password controls that you can put in place. The first is the standard profile options. So the DBA should have changed the password profile options to mirror your IT security standard. So if your minimum length is 8 characters for your passwords, well, the DBA should have changed that to 8. The Oracle 11i default was 5. For R12, it's 6. So those things should be changed. Number one is the area that most people focus in on. So we often see those changed. A lot of times the auditors will find that pretty quickly because it's something they look at. What we don't see a lot of times is that the operational procedures are weak for most organizations. So this is number 2. So the operational procedures are, how do you actually manage the passwords? How do you control them? And really the biggest one is the initial passwords. Probably 75 or 80% of these security assessments we do, the initial passwords are very weak and are basically typically a standard like welcome 1. And then what we do is we can actually look at and break out what the passwords are when we do our assessment. So if you have 1,000 users, we can actually see what each password was assigned for those 1,000 users. And in most Oracle Business Suite environments, somewhere in the range of 10 to 40% of the accounts are never logged into. So you've got a lot of accounts out there, and there's no standard stale account functionality within the Business Suite to disable an account after so many days. And so often there's many, many accounts that have weak passwords like welcome 1. So a lot of times people can say, well, I wonder if the CEO has never logged in. That's usually one thing we check often is we look for the CEO's account, and a lot of times, probably 50% of the time, the CEO has never logged in but was given an account, and we can actually access the CEO's account. That's always a fun thing to do. Another area is password resets. How well controlled is the password reset functionality? We found some cases where it's fairly weak, and you can actually go through in the business suite, depending on how it's set up, is actually you can just reset people's passwords at will. And then finally, another area for passwords is secure password storage. There's been an inherent weakness in the Oracle e-business suite architecture that actually allows you to decrypt passwords. So the scenario here is, it's actually pretty interesting that what happens is you take, again, you clone your production environment. So you clone your production environment down to development, and you typically open up development a little bit more. So you allow the developers kind of full access. They can read all the tables like the FND user table. Oh, by the way, the FND user table has the encrypted passwords. And basically, if you go out to Google and search Oracle e-business suite decryption password, you can actually find a very easy-to-use SQL script that will decrypt all the production passwords. So again, the production passwords have been copied down to development, and now one of your developers can actually go in and decrypt and find out all the production passwords for all your users. Oracle has fixed this and made it more difficult to do that, but unfortunately that's not enabled by default. And that's now another setting that's in the Secure Configuration Guide that hopefully they've changed the password storage parameters. So again, these are just all devils in the details. There's a lot of different scenarios that people can go through and actually obtain data from the Oracle e-business suite, and unless each of these settings is changed, there's a problem. So as the manager, what should you be doing? Well, first talk with your DBAs. Ensure that the Secure Configuration Guide has been applied, that it's gone through as a checklist, and that each item has been completed. And if something hasn't been completed, why? Why are the DBAs afraid to do it? The second step is actually you have to verify. The Secure Configuration Guide is a very detailed document. It's step by step. Again, like on the default passwords, well, for the database, there's 200 to 300 default passwords. For the e-business suite, there's 23 passwords. Unless each of those has been changed and verified that it's been changed, you still have a security risk. And then we also recommend doing these reviews and assessments of the configuration after you've done major patching upgrades. When you go from 11i to R12, well, a lot of different things get reset. So even if you secured your 11i environment really well, when you go to R12, a lot of these settings are actually a reset, and you have to almost start from scratch. So that's kind of really from the configuration perspective. Another area is actually security patches. So even if you're doing a fairly good job on the configuration and you think you've secured it down, well, what's happening is Oracle is actually releasing security patches on a regular basis in the form of critical patch updates. So every quarter, Oracle fixes probably 4 or 5 bugs within the Oracle e-business suite. Then pretty serious security bugs, so people can access data they shouldn't be allowed to. And then what happens is some of the information is actually published out on the internet on how to do that. So over time, there's been 236 security bugs since 2005. So that's a lot of opportunities for someone to do something. So unless you're applying the critical patch updates on a regular basis, it's actually fairly easy to break into the Oracle e-business suite or the Oracle database, even if you think you protected it really well. These bugs are actually pretty easy to exploit. We gave a presentation not too long ago and actually showed you some examples of how someone would go about researching in Google, finding an exploit, and actually attacking an Oracle database. If you go to our YouTube website, you'll actually see that recorded presentation. So over time, Oracle is getting better, but every single quarter they still release the critical patch updates. So as a manager, you really need to be looking at, are we applying these security patches on a regular basis, and what's the impact to our organization? And there's no scenario that I can think of for any organization that should be saying, oh, we don't need to apply that. You need to be applying security patches at least twice a year, if not more, depending on how secure your organization has to be. So for CPU patches, the biggest problem we see on the CPU patches is not the difficulty of applying the patches. It's really working with the business to prioritize the patches. Patches require downtime. They require testing. So no matter what happens, there's an impact to the organization. Unfortunately, this is something from Oracle. It's a problem from Oracle that gets pushed down to you that now you have to actually spend time and effort to do it. But unfortunately, these things are actually pretty easy to exploit. and you need to be thinking about it and actually working to get it into your cycles. You have to have a standard patching procedure. You should be doing this at least twice a year, so you should have a way to do the regression testing for the security patches. And then also, an easier way to apply security patches is whenever you're doing upgrades, and this is one area that baffles me that every organization is not doing it. It's an easy way to get critical security patches in. So whenever you do an application or database upgrade, as a manager, you should be looking at the schedule and saying, why aren't the security patches in here? Not many organizations, every single time they do a database upgrade, always apply the latest critical patch update. It's a very easy thing to do because you're already applying a patch, you're already doing the downtime for the database upgrade. The security patch should always be applied to that. So as a manager, when you're reviewing the schedule and you're seeing that, oh yes, we're doing a database upgrade or an application upgrade, let's say from 12.1.2 to 12.1.3, the latest critical patch updates should always be attached to that. It adds very little risk. Security patches tend never to break anything, especially on the database side. So they should always be included in every upgrade. And as a manager, you should be enforcing that. And just what happens a lot of times is the DBAs kind of gloss over and say, oh, we just have to get that big patch in. Let's not worry about the security patches. It's a very easy way to get the security patches in to do it during upgrades. So that's kind of a high level talking about configuration overall. Now let's talk about protecting data. Really, data is what your application is about. You wouldn't have the application without data. So you may be running HR, will have sensitive data like social security numbers. You might be running some sort of e-commerce, iPayment, iStore, order management that would have credit card numbers. Even if you don't have credit card numbers or social security numbers, you most likely have some sort of bank account numbers as part of AP and things like that. So one of the big problems with sensitive data in the Oracle Business Suite is it's everywhere. Not to really walk through table names here, but this is just kind of an example. What I'm trying to show you is what the problem is and why it exists in the Oracle Business Suite. So when we're talking about credit card data, social security numbers, it's not just in one spot. It often gets scattered around the application. So when the DBAs are talking about, oh yeah, we protected it in that right there in that one table. Well, you need to be asking, well, is it in other tables? Where else is the data? So these are the standard Oracle Business Suite tables. So these are things delivered by Oracle where sensitive data should reside. The problem now comes in is it can be many, many other places. And so one of the things that we do during our security assessments is we actually do a sensitive data scan. So we actually look through the entire database looking for sensitive data. One of the major areas is custom tables. So every time you have an interface in or out or a custom table or some sort of custom module or process, a lot of times you'll have sensitive data in there. So you may have an interface out to another system that requires HR data, and for some reason the developers 5 years ago put in social security number to get passed. Well, then that gets stored into a table. Another area is maintenance tables. DBAs are very good about protecting data and backing it up. So whenever they're told by Oracle to do a direct SQL update, and this happens more often than you'd actually think, is they may have to update the PRL PeopleF table. They may have to purge something or change a column or something like that, and they have to do a direct SQL update. DBAs are very good about making sure that they don't lose any data. So in this case, they actually would back up the table. They'd do a create table as select statement, and they back up the table really quickly. And then what they do is they send the email back to the person asking them to do the update and say, okay, I did the update. Let me know if we can do it, if it was good, if there was no problems. Well, that usually takes a few days, and then they respond back, oh, no problem. Well, in the meantime, the DBA has forgotten that it actually created the backup table, and the backup table gets left out there. Again, now you've got another spot that has sensitive data in it. Interface tables are another area that typically have sensitive data. And then also at the operating system level in the flat files, when you have interfaces coming back and forth, you'll have to often see sensitive data in those interface files. So the key is you're trying to protect this, but if anyone can steal the data at any point here, they can actually get a lot of valuable information. And that happens a lot of times. We actually had one case where one customer lost a significant amount of credit card numbers because they actually had some log files sitting out on a public FTP site that they were logging their iPayment, and it got into an anonymous FTP site, and that's how they lost the data. Someone just browsing around that one day and found it and stole a bunch of credit card information. So these things happen in real life, that the data gets scattered around. You have to be very attuned to, okay, where is the data? Are we actually looking? Do we understand exactly where it is? And do we have the processes around to make sure it doesn't get scattered about too much? For credit cards require a very specific type of encryption. So anyone running credit cards within the Oracle Business Suite environment, and the one exception here is if you're running your own credit cards for your corporate cards, so you make P cards and things like that, those are actually exempt. But if you're running anything that would be a customer credit card number, you need to abide by the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, which requires those credit card numbers to be encrypted. Oracle supports the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, and they have their own encryption. And it's a custom encryption. Again, Oracle doesn't enable it by default. So you actually have to have encryption enabled. So this is one of the questions asked your DBA: how are we handling credit card encryption within the business suite if we're processing credit cards at all? So that was credit cards. Now what do you do about all your other sensitive data within your Oracle Business Suite? Unfortunately, it's very difficult to encrypt data within the Oracle Business Suite. There's no easy way to do it. It's fairly expensive. It can have performance issues. A lot of the solutions out there, like Oracle's transparent data encryption, doesn't provide you much value, especially for the large cost it is. So if you can't actually encrypt data, the other option is actually really to limit access to it. And one of the biggest areas that we see a problem is that customers create like an apps read account, a generic account which then they share around. A lot of times, based on the data model, it's very difficult in Oracle database to actually restrict data privileges to one single value. So if you have an apps read account, it's very, very difficult for the DBAs to say, I don't want that account to have access to Social Security numbers. That's very difficult in Oracle database. You think it would be easy because you'd say, oh, just don't allow access to that. And it's actually the opposite. You have to say specifically allow access to everything else, and that's the only thing you can access. So it's a positive model, not a negative model. You can't just say revoke access to one column. You have to say, well, I either grant access to everything, or I have to say grant access to 250,000 things individually and just leave off that list the one thing I want access to. There's other ways to do it. You can use fine-grained access controls and things, but you need to have a strategy around this. You need to be thinking about, okay, how do I grant access just to that one column? Do I have an apps read account? Am I using named accounts, which you should be? The second area where protecting sensitive data comes into play is when you're doing cloning. Again, I'm harping on cloning a little bit, but we see a lot of security issues related around cloning because you're taking your production database and copying it down to test and development. Oracle Business Suite is very different than most custom applications or other applications. For a custom application, you'd very seldom ever take production and copy it down to your development environment. But in an Oracle Business Suite environment, you do that quite often. So we see in a lot of IT organizations, especially where the management team for the business suite is more used to custom development, they don't understand some of the issues around cloning because you're taking your production environment, copying it down. You have to make changes. And the one big area on sensitive data is you have to scramble all those non-production databases. So your test and development environments shouldn't have real Social Security numbers. So as soon as the DBAs actually copy the database before they open it up to the users, they need to actually be running scramble scripts to actually get rid of the Social Security numbers. And again, as we talked about where data gets scattered, they actually have to find and know exactly where Social Security numbers are stored in every single table. And that can also be hard. We had one HR environment that we actually helped them develop their scramble scripts recently, and they actually had to scramble 27 tables, I think it was, where the Social Security numbers were. They had a lot of customizations and a lot of interfaces, but that's what happens in a lot of environments. So typically you're not scrambling in one spot for Social Security numbers. You're probably at least minimum of 5 to 10, and maybe as many as 20 or 30. So scrambling is not a trivial task. It may add a couple hours to your clone process too. That's not unusual either. So protecting sensitive data as a manager, what should you be doing? The first thing is you have to know where your data is. You have to be maintaining a data inventory. You have to be working with your development team. And so when the developers are saying, oh, we need to put Social Security numbers in this custom table, somebody really should be asking why. We shouldn't be doing that. We should be concentrate our Social Security numbers all in one location, our credit card numbers, in just the standard Oracle tables. You need to be diligent about direct database access. Who's accessing the data and why? Do you have an apps read account? Those should all be individual accounts. Direct database access should be limited whenever possible. And then ask questions regarding data access. Make sure what somebody needs to access is for business reasons. We see a lot of cases where people are just given unfettered database access, and the business cases maybe for 1 or 2 tables, but they have access to Social Security numbers when there's no reason they should be. So that's a high level of protecting sensitive data, because that's your really most valuable asset in Oracle Business Suite. If you got Social Security numbers, credit card numbers, that's what somebody's going to be after, and you can sell it. Identity theft for a very good valid identity of Social Security number, name, address, date of birth is worth about $50. Credit card numbers are worth very little now, but if you can steal 100,000 credit card numbers at $1 each, that's still worth something. So the final topic is external access. And when we're talking about external access, this is when you're opening up your Business Suite environment to the internet. So you may be using iSupply or something, but the way the Oracle Business Suite works is it's a very highly integrated application. So if you're opening up just iSupply, you're not opening up iSupply, you're opening up HR2, General Ledger, every module that you own, you open up to the internet. So we won't go through this in great detail, but this basically, I'm trying to highlight what the problem is. The Oracle Business Suite is 250 plus modules. So everyone on this call today, if you're running Oracle Business Suite, you are running financials, manufacturing, CRM, Oracle Student System, HR, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Because it's a highly integrated application, when you install it, even if you didn't buy it, license it, install it, or do anything, you still have every single module that Oracle has in the eBusiness Suite installed. A lot of people will fight me on this tooth and nail, but no, this is the way the application works. It installs everything no matter what. So when you all of a sudden stick this on the internet, you're basically running Oracle Student System on the internet. So if there's a flaw or a security issue in Oracle Student System, you can basically get to your HR data. Even though you may be running iSupplier, you're a manufacturing company, well, we don't run Oracle Student System. Well, you have Oracle Student System installed because that's the way the application works. And so what you have to do is do a very specific configuration, which is not well documented by Oracle, to basically say, hey, this is not what I want to run. I want to run a lot less on the internet. And so what you do is you basically take 20,000 web pages that are standard in the application, and you narrow it down just to the couple hundred that you're running for your module, like iSupplier. And it's a very specific configuration. So when you talk about doing iSupplier, there's a DMZ configuration document that you basically have to go through with great detail to go through and configure the application correctly. And the first thing is what modules are certified by Oracle. So when you're opening up Oracle Business Suite to the internet, you have to say, okay, we'll only open up the certified modules. And a lot of people kind of say, oh, no, let's open up anyways. We need to for some reason. Well, Oracle spent a significant amount of effort to make sure these applications were basically secured properly and have additional controls around them to be opened up to the internet. So if you're running a module on the internet that's not on this list, that's a problem, and that's a potential security risk. So Oracle has 2 support notes. If you go to My Oracle Support, the DBAs can find these notes, and it's a very specific configuration that has to be walked through to say, okay, this is what we've got running on the internet, this is what's certified, this is what we'll allow on the internet. Because if you don't follow the instructions exactly in these 2 documents, depending on your version, you basically open up all the other modules. So even if you're running iSupplier and you know nothing about Oracle Student System, well, Oracle Student System is running, and there's a lot of security flaws in Oracle Student System. And by the way, any flaw in the eBusiness Suite allows you access to the entire eBusiness Suite, even your HR data, your Social Security numbers, and everything else. Because the way the application works is there's one database account everything runs against. And that's just the architecture of the application. It is, remember, the application was also written in 1986, was when it was first designed, and a lot of the back end has not changed since then. The back end data model and architecture hasn't changed since 1986. Well, it's got nifty web front end to it, but there's a lot of compromises to make it all work the way it does. And the big compromise is the apps account. Everything runs as apps, and any flaw that can then use the apps account, and that's almost every flaw that you find, has access to all data, including your HR data. So now you've opened up your HR data to the internet even though you didn't intend to. So as a manager, what should you be doing with the DMZ? Talk with the DBAs. Make sure the DMZ configuration has been applied properly. And the key part is verify it. It's very prone to errors. One of the key steps is actually if you read through the document, you would say, well, that's optional. That's not part of the configuration. Well, one of the key configurations of the DMZ is actually in an appendice that you have to do. So unless you're going through and making sure that it's been properly configured and doing a periodic review and assessment, there's potentially security issues. And also, we also recommend you do external assessments or penetration tests on your e-business suite environment, because it is a very specific configuration, and any little error can open up a lot more than you'd want on the internet. One of the things that would keep me up at night is the external configuration, because it is so specific, and the risk is if you don't do it right, people can access it. If you just go into Google and you start Googling Oracle e-business suite, and then some of the key web pages, you actually find hundreds and hundreds of hits on the internet. So people can find your Oracle e-business suite environment on the internet by just going to Google. We've got a lot of different Google searches that we do, and we can see hundreds and hundreds of Oracle customers who have their e-business suite environment on the internet. It's very easy to find, and as soon as an exploit's published by Oracle, each of those customers are very vulnerable. So that's how kind of it works and how easy it is for someone to actually find an attack on an Oracle e-business suite environment. So that was basically the high level, walking through some of the issues with the Oracle Business Suite, talking about the configuration, things they have to do with the configuration, how to protect sensitive data, how to protect the external environment. So what we'll do is open up to some questions. Before we do that, here's my contact information, so feel free to always contact us if you do have any questions. At Integrigy, we're very open to answering questions. We want to know what Oracle customers are thinking regarding security, what problems they're having, what difficulties they're having, because that helps us fine-tune our message. A lot of the information we do publish out on our website, either in the form of white papers or on our blog. We also record all these sessions, so we've got some very good information going back the last 5 years on Oracle Business Suite Security. So if you want more information, we've got a YouTube channel with a lot of videos. And I'll turn it back to Phil and see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Steve. We've got several questions that have been submitted. The first one, what document, checklist, or other reference should we use to secure our Oracle e-business suite?
So basically the key one is still the Oracle Secure Configuration Guide for 11i and R12. That's still really the gold standard. It is dated. We think there's a lot more that needs to be added to it. At Integrigy, we've got some internal checklists that we use on our assessments, and we're actually talking about, because we get the requests so often, about actually either writing a book or publishing a lot more information out on that. But the starting point is still really the Secure Configuration Guide. If you go through and do that, you're really far along the way. But remember, there's still probably more that you can do, and there's a lot more things that you should be looking at. And those documents keep track of a lot of the configuration items, change the setting, apply this patch. The area that they really start falling down is how do you really secure sensitive data? How do you do data access? So how do you avoid having an apps read account, things like that.
Okay. Next one. Are there any areas of concern for not-for-profit or charitable organizations?
So specifically for any one industry or segment, most of the things that we've talked about here are really related to is cross-industry. There's no one area that I would say, well, if you're financial services or nonprofit or manufacturing, that you'd really have to do anything significantly different. When we evaluate an Oracle Business Suite environment, we're looking more at what data does it contain. So for a nonprofit, they would probably have, still they might be running HR, so they'd have HR data. Well, any other industry could also have HR data. So we typically focus in on, do you have credit card numbers? Do you have social security numbers? what happens if someone stole key data elements? What would be the impact to your organization? And that's really how you should be looking at Oracle E-Business Suite environment.
Okay, next one. Is there a safe way to make some of your responsibilities accessible via the Internet? Does Note 380490.1 cover that?
So in terms of opening up the E-Business Suite to the Internet, if you go through the Oracle DMZ documents, which are the two notes here, they specifically give you a way to specify exactly which responsibilities are available on the Internet. And the only ones that should be available on the Internet are those that are intended to be. So if you're running iSupplier, there's a vendor supplier. There's a supplier responsibility. If you're running iStore, there's certain external iStore responsibilities. If you're running iRecruitment, there's certain external iRecruitment responsibilities. What you should not be opening up, and theoretically you can open up any responsibility you want, but you should only be doing those ones that are really meant for external users. Internal users always should be going through a VPN or some other secure access method to access the Oracle E-Business Suite versus trying to attempt to use the external environment.
Next question, and this is a little bit confusing. I think it has to do with CPU patches, but I'll leave it out. Are there any dangers of implementing one was hashing of FDM passwords? Any gotchas or things to look out for?
So this is basically referring back to the application passwords. And so the Oracle E-Business Suite application passwords, by default in both 11i and R12, are stored as encrypted values. That means that there's actually an encryption key, and in this case, the fundamental encryption key is the app's password. So if I know the app's password, and there's ways to get that if I know any of the other passwords, I can then decrypt every single application user. And so that's a fundamental flaw, and those are stored in the FND user table, and so those are all your application users. And the fundamental issue is now if I copy it down to development, one of my developers can go in, because a lot of times you open up the app's password, but there's 2 or 3 other ways to get it, so even if they don't know the app's password, they can still get it. Then they'll know all your application user passwords for production. Oracle actually fixed it, and the way they fixed it was instead of encrypting it, so encrypting is retrievable, so if I encrypt the value, I can actually get that value back by using a key. The way they changed it in the recommended way in the security world is to actually hash it. So a hash is not non-retrievable. So if I hash a value, I turn it into a really big number string, and then what I do is when I want to check the password, I just hash the password that I'm trying to compare it to and see if the hashes equate. And the hash space is extremely large, so there's like trillions of values that are possible. So Oracle changed the password storage to a hash, so it's very hard to actually get the new passwords back. You can actually brute force it and things like that. There's other ways to do it, but we'll ignore that for now. And so Oracle put that in as an optional capability. The key here is optional. It's not enabled by default even in R12. The capability is delivered natively in R12, but it's not enabled. So you actually have to go run FND-CPass and actually do user migrate, and it'll change the encrypted passwords to hash passwords, which are much more safe way to store passwords. The question is, are there any dangers or any risks of actually doing that? A couple years ago, when they first implemented it, it caused all kinds of problems, and a lot of things didn't work. In R12, I had not heard of any major bugs or any major issues. We recommend every single client of ours to actually implement it, especially in R12. In 11i, there are some gotchas and some issues, because in 11i, you still have a lot of things connecting, like ADI and products like that, so some of those external things. In R12, it's all web ADI, and it's all controlled by the web application server. But in 11i, ADI is still using SQLNet and connecting, and actually breaks ADI and some of those other optional add-ons. So in 11i, before you enable the hashed passwords, you actually have to go through the documents, and if you go look up FND-CPass on MetaLink, they'll pop right up. and make sure that you've actually patched ADI and all the other components correctly to actually allow the hashed passwords to work. So that's really the only gotcha is ADI and some of the other modules in 11i. But in R12, I've never seen a problem. Not to say that it might not be, but there were some bugs early on, but those are all been corrected a long time ago.
All right, thank you, Steve. All right, and I'm going to thank everybody for attending today's e-learning webinar.